Broadcasting from the far side of Enceladus, beaming in at the speed of light across the vast chasms of space, streaming directly into your brain. You're listening to episode 20 of the Spartacast League. I am Phelan, and joining us today are Attica and a new host, Aramal. Step aboard the mothership, please.
Hello.
Hello there. And greetings from Enceladus. So it's been an interesting couple weeks since we've been off air. Lots happened with the media circus and the social media circus in particular. Apparently, Stormy Daniels confirmed Toad for Smash Brothers in the worst possible way and the worst version of the game of Smash ever. Let's just say you don't want to play that. Yeah, that's where we're going there with this today. I'm sorry, you guys, but hey, I had to make a joke. I do have to say, isn't it just surreal, the world that we're living in, that a porn star is talking about the president's private parts on social media, and that's the big talk of the nation? This is absurd.
Everything that was satire in 2008 is now reality. And it's such a singularity of satire becoming reality that comedy can't happen anymore.
Comedy can't happen because comedy is real. In fact, I want to read something here, and I want to see if you all know who this person is that the president is talking about. I say that this is the president because this is obvious who it is, because nobody else talks or writes like this. This excerpt here that I'm going to read for you sounds like something out of Saturday Night Live, and it's totally real. So Trump wrote, "I was being really tough, and so was he. And we would go back and forth. And then we fell in love. No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they were great letters. And then we fell in love." Who is the president talking about?
Obviously, Kim Jong-Un.
Yes, it's Kim Jong-Un.
Kimmy.
His boy Kim.
He did this to own the libs. They freak out whenever he says anything good about Kim Jong-un, because Kim Jong-un is placed on the same dictatorship scale as Hitler and Mussolini, and they consider Stalin the same as Hitler. It's all just big bad for them. And so he did this to own the libs, because he's got to be self-aware of like the whole like him kissing Putin, the whole like homoeroticism and joke about him. That's really distasteful, by the way. I wish liberals would stop, but they're not gonna. So you know he did this to own the libs.
Well, I mean, their entire presidency is just there to own the libs. It's just like the Trump administration actually based an entire decision to lower the efficiency standards, or rather, I should say, maintain the current efficiency standards of vehicles based off of the idea that climate change is going to happen. And the 4 degrees centigrade it's on track. It's real. It's going to happen by 2100. So why the F not? Why not just do nothing about it? Just let it happen. And it's not going away. So let's just party. And if we do this, we'll own the libs.
I do find it interesting though how it because I think originally it was like the Democrats in America sort of supported dialogue with North Korea, or at least not completely bombing them and embargoing them. But it's interesting how it's almost 180 now.
It's because non-interventionalism has become a policy among certain circles, not all circles within the right. Neoliberalism is an interventionalist ideology, and so is neoconservative. These two ideologies share a lot in common. What we're actually seeing with the non-interventionalists, those are more the populists, the so-called libertarians. They're more into that. But the reason that they're into that is it's basically just business for them. It's bad for their businesses to be interventionalist. And the other thing is because the Democrats are also pro-war now and pro-intervention. Now, I did want to get to one of our main segments here. Moving on, though, Attica, last week, or not really last week, it was actually a couple weeks ago when we did the show together, there was actually a topic that we kind of forgot about that I actually had high priority on, and it didn't make it into the show. And we were going to do a Spartacast After Hours about it, But you had a very interesting experience during the elections in Arizona, and something actually happened there, a couple different things, and I wanted you to go over that.
Man, something happened.
So what was that something that happened during the elections? And I actually want to start off with the event that happened before the elections proper.
So it's one big ball of kick in the face, because there's no other way of putting it except the elections were stolen. And in an actual way, not like some Russian Twitters tweeted some good stuff about Trump and suddenly the election is a fraud. I mean, actually over several weeks, step by step stolen.
So you're saying like actual bureaucrats stole the election?
Yes. In plain day with absolutely no response. So the election in Arizona, primaries in Arizona, consisted of state house, state senate, an actual senate race because Jeff Flake is no longer running, and two important ballot initiatives. So, and Arizona's entirely gerrymandered, and I live in the gerrymandered Democrat district that is like the flagship Democrat district because it has the minority leaders of both houses in it, and et cetera, all the big chairs. And Arizona was founded on the concept of a ballot initiatives. It refused to become a state unless its state constitution was ratified by the federal government and included the ability to have ballot initiatives. Arizona used to be really progressive. I mean, we raised the minimum wage with the ballot initiative. The people just sort of realized, well, we can't get anything done with this practical Republican dictatorship we live under. So we'll just pass everything with a ballot initiative. The two ballot initiatives, two really important ballot initiatives, were one would have given everything that the teachers did not win through negotiation with their teacher strike. And the other would have effectively repealed Citizens United in the state of Arizona, to where all election funding would have had to be transparent, reported, open books, etc. 2-3 days before the primary vote actually happened, the Supreme Court of Arizona just ripped them away. Said no, they don't exist anymore. In which should have been like a guns to the courthouse moment where you go, oh, Hems, you're being all violent. Like, this is not a strange thing to our political system. Like, even as recent as the 60s, you know, black communities were taking their guns to go vote. After the Civil War, former slave populations held their guns above their head as they waded through southern rivers to get to their polling place to go vote. Having to back up the people's will against the capitalists with the people's guns is not a stranger to our political system. But of course, that wasn't the response. The response was, we'll try better next time, and even when we're losing and getting kicked on the ground, we're winning. We have the moral majority. So they took away the ballot initiatives, the two actual things that could have gotten done, that could have changed politics in Arizona. The Senate race, the national Senate race, was between 5 Republicans, one of which was Joe Arpaio, and it was fun seeing his signs constantly vandalized and torn apart. Eventually, I forget her name, but a Republican woman won the primary, and the primary on the Democrat side was, there were two candidates. There was Kristen Sinema, which is the only Democrat in a room full of Democrats, even the most liberal anti-Bernie Democrats, who can elicit a groan, because she is hesitant to sign any legislation does not have a Republican co-signer.
So to back it up here, basically,
there's
Kristen
a lot. I'm
Sinema,
sorry.
Okay, hey, that's okay. So,
a lot of
Kristen Sinema is basically neoliberalism and political compromise in person. Like if there were a persona that was that.
I mean, the persona is Clinton, but she very much has the same strategy. She's got all her people in the party in place, paid off the right, positions, and it's a sure thing. And she didn't even campaign, didn't go talk to anyone, didn't do any speeches, nothing, just let the dominoes fall. And then there was Deidre Aboud, who was a trans Muslim woman who got 20% of the vote in the primary. Now, the shocking thing about this is that 2 months before even the primary was going to happen, I was getting calls from the official Democratic Party, not the Social Democrats that I chose to volunteer some time with, who sound really excited when they call you, but the actual Democrats who sound like they want to die on the other end of the phone call me, asking me if I'm willing to knock doors for Kristen Sinema. I'm sorry, is there a primary? There is a primary. I don't care if mathematically they can't win. You might decide you want that person in a few election cycles. Why are you kicking them in the face? Why aren't you acknowledging that there's someone in your party who's running? I'm really surprised that like this didn't get the attention of like Jimmy Dore, because Deidre was a social democrat as well. Not only did they take away the ballot initiatives, not only did they shove a candidate no one wanted down everyone's throat, but the night of the primary. Now, I vote by mail, so I wasn't physically there at the ballot box, but I know about this because it was heavily recorded. The night of the primary in Maricopa County, which is the county that the city of Phoenix is in, which decides all of the elections in Arizona because of the most population, all the voting machines in Maricopa County all at once went down and crashed. These machines that somehow aren't connected to the internet crashed.
There's only two possibilities as to how that could happen. So one, either they really were networked up to the internet, or two, they were pre-programmed to go down. Probably, as you said, it was a certain time, so a certain time. Now the thing is the way that machines are imaged for that, it is believable that they could not have been connected to the internet. But here's the thing. These machines, the images should have been tested before they were ran. And part of that testing would be having them run the course through the time specified. That should have all have been tested and everything. And really, there's no reason as to why, other than a programmed exception, that the machines should have all went down at the same time. Because even if they were voting and everything, and the vote conditions is what triggered it, there's still too much of a difference between number of votes and how things are voting. It really seems questionable that
more than questionable.
Yeah, all of these variables hit and cause this bug on multiple machines at multiple locations at the exact same time. And I'm coming from a computer science background here on this one. I know a lot about computers. I used to repair computers for a living. So for me to hear this, I'm hearing either this wasn't tested, which is incompetence, but the chances of that are very small. What I'm actually hearing here when I hear this kind of thing happening is that some piece of code was intentionally somehow inserted to stop these machines from functioning. Do you think it was just to stop the late night people coming in from voting so that...
I mean, it wasn't even late night. I mean, the poll, it happened like... Polls were set to close at, I think either 7 or 8, maybe it was 9. I forget when the polls are supposed to close and when the county recorder wanted them extended to, which of course we didn't get, but it wasn't late. The machine just went down and basically said, oh, that's it, vote's done, rolled up shop.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is the machines went down and they refused to extend the voting hours to make up. So if you were in line and the machines went down, you just didn't get a vote even though you were in line.
Exactly. Unless you wanted to wait for them whenever they would come up. But I mean, it's intentional, so there's no hurry to fix them. So you go home. Now, Arizona has or is developing an extensive vote by mail system. One of the good things that came out of 2016 here, besides voting out Arpaio, was that a Democrat won the county recorder seat. And in Maricopa County, the county recorder organizes the elections in terms of where the polling places are, what times they open, what times they close. Of course, he has to submit all that stuff to some government group of state senators or whatever, because God forbid they don't have control over everything. He has a fair hand in designing this. So you decided, okay, we're going to move towards 80% mail-in ballot. Now that was only 2 years ago, so it's nowhere near that point. But I voted by mail. When I was campaigning for the Social Democrat that I was campaigning for, you get a paper with people's names and their party registration and the information on it, and out of a page of 10. And maybe every 2 pages there'd be someone who wasn't on the vote by mail list. So this maybe wasn't as big of a knockdown in terms of votes as they were hoping it would be. It was obviously a desperate move to do this so brazenly and openly.
This is the kind of stuff that is done for the purpose of demoralizing voters so that they don't go out and vote. This is why the Supreme Court voted it down, because they realize that they vote down all the stuff that the liberals want to vote for, the liberals aren't going to go to the polls. They take all the stuff that the Social Democrats would vote for, Social Democrats aren't going to show up at the polls. And while I am opposed to incrementalism through elections and the electoral path, I don't think it's going to get us there. It is important to show up at the polls just to stop the bleeding. That is extremely crucial when the political climate and the things that are going up to vote are. But
what am I if I go and vote, or more likely if I take the piece of paper out of the mailbox and look at it, what am I voting for? They've taken away everything I would want to, but I have nothing to vote for. So the Senate choice is a non-choice because it's essentially two Republicans, right? So I don't have that. My district for the state is gerrymandered, so the primary was the election, which the silver lining here is that in my state district, the neoliberal Democrats were the floor was just wiped, and it's all social Democrats now.
That's really where things really matter, is the locals and state levels, because...
Right, but it's gerrymandered so that they'll never have a majority in the House or the Senate. They'll never have power, and they'll never have a governor. But that's cool, but great. I'm looking at this ballot, everything I want to vote for taken away, and the Senate choice isn't really a choice, and the primary was basically the general for the state house. So what am I doing with this piece of paper? All the decisions that they wanted to make for me, they already made for me, and the decisions they allowed me to make, well, I already made them. Like, there's no real point in the general.
So the point of elections is that, of course, it's rigged, it's fixed. They tell you what you're going to choose for and everything else. But that is to stop the bleeding from being as bad as possible. The thing is, and this is where liberals don't get it, is that elections are not the end-all, be-all. And that is the thing that people need to get their head. They need,
like I said, it should have been guns at the courthouse there.
Well, not even that. Okay, so you can't do things through elections, so you form unions and you get things done through the power of labor and general strikes and just basic strikes, just through disrupting the economy.
So voting is an idealistic mechanism, and idealistic is in idealism versus materialism. It is I think and I make an action based on that thought that derives an outcome in the world. And labor organization, labor itself, the withholding of that labor, strikes, refusing to work, refusing to produce, is a materialist way of affecting and building or tearing down.
It creates a disruption within society. And that's really what we need, is we need society to be disrupted, and we need essentially the government, the shareholders, the business owners to feel uncomfortable and to feel unwelcome to get the point across. And you're not
it takes them by surprise too, because they're idealists. Like, the entire country, the entire world is so permeated and drunk on idealist ideologies that when materialism happened, when people organize around that, it makes no sense. And that's why people's first recourse isn't to pick a hammer up and make it stop. In fact, since becoming a communist, I've had to retrain my mind to remind myself I can physically pick up hammers and make things stop, rather than thinking about it and thinking my way through it and envisioning and making an action based on a thought to materially change my world. I don't like the way that light fixture is, to go and fix it without consulting the landlord or whatever, just doing it, because they'll never notice because they don't come on the property anyway. So that kind of propensity to action is what has to be spread.
Right, and then there's also so much of our lives that are just outside the purview of election. It's just like there was a study done by J.P. Morgan Chase fairly recently, for instance, that Uber drivers and other people within the gig economy that are workers are actually earning half of what they did 5 years ago. The reason isn't necessarily what you would think it is. at first it just sounds like they're just cutting it in half. So there is some of that going on, that they are making less overall because fare prices have lowered and whatnot. But also the other part of this is this is people that work full time and they're making Uber or Lyft their side gig. So they're doing it like 10 hours a week or so. And, that's how they get their side money. The average Uber driver's monthly paycheck went down from about $1,200 to just over $500 total.
Which isn't a surprise. The entire idea starting out was to lower the cost of labor and get around minimum wage. So it's not really a surprise. Like when it's a new thing and there's fewer people doing it, there's fewer people in the pool to possibly get the assignment of go here, pick up this person, drop them off. On average, one person is going to get more people. But when, as time goes on and you build up the mythos of you can quit your day job and just drive your car around all day and become a millionaire, more people do it. And that pool drops. Well, that pool gets larger and the chances drop.
Yeah, I don't know. I find it interesting because, there's not really, there is obviously a gig economy sort of in Australia, but not like there is in the US, like how it's so, I guess you could say, developed.
Well, you live sort of out in the countryside, right? Like, when was the last time you were in Sydney? Like
years ago. I've only been there, once or twice.
Or, okay, when was the last time you were in a large city?
Literally just over a day ago.
And would you say there was, a large gig economy there?
Well, it's kind of hard because I wasn't really there looking for it, but in terms of a gig economy, in terms of stuff like Uber and that, it definitely exists. It's there. It's just the scale of it is not like it is in the US and other countries. There's not really too many people living off Uber. There obviously are people who are, but there's not like there is in the US where it's it becomes sort of a livelihood or it's like a second job that they have to do to survive.
And that's the
Whereas
thing.
Here,
I've
not really noticed it.
It is a second job because one single quote main jobs don't pay a standard of living. You can't pay your rent and your bills with just that one job.
Well, also, it kind of has to be a second job because of the way that Uber is structured. Their workers really do get screwed because the way Uber works is it uses the standard model for consumer ratings. And the way that actually works is if you have a 1 to 5 or 0 to 5 scale of rate this employee, if you rate anything less than a 5 on a 1 through 5, you're actually punishing that employee. 4 and lower actually count. 4 is rated a 0, and 3 and lower is rated -1, and only 5 is rated a 1. They add all of this up, they average it out per customer, and then they multiply that decimal by 100 to get a percentage. And then if your percentage is not above a certain number, in Uber's case, I believe it's something like 80% or something like that. Basically, your turn in the queue to pick people up gets lower because the way Uber works is people with the higher ratings get the jobs first. And then if your rating drops below a 4 on the re-rate, as what we would consider a 4 anyway, then you don't get anything. You get bumped from driving from Uber, so they essentially fire you. And I
was fired from an app called Postmates, which is basically food delivery, Uberized. And I used my scooter because it was the only way that I could actually make any money because I paid no money in gas. And I would just get kicked from it because my score fell too low because, I don't know, they just wanted... The people who use Uber are the most absolutely stuck-up, bourgeois-minded, shine my boots while you're busy breathing type people. So if you didn't bow to them as you handed them their fucking McDonald's shake or whatever, they would just say that you weren't good, you didn't do a good job, and get you kicked off.
He did not refer to me as sir or ma'am, and I felt insulted. Or he did refer to me as sir or ma'am, and I felt insulted because now I feel old. You can't win with these. I've worked customer service for years. Most of my life, I've worked a customer service job. There's nothing you can do. If somebody wants to feel insulted, There's nothing you can do to essentially disengage them from that. So many of these people come in with the mindset that they are going to create a problem, and then that's just it. They're going to create a problem. Now,
yeah, that's the thing with so many people is like they go in there and they want to create a problem, or they just go in there looking to disrupt the person's work, or just be an asshole in general.
But the whole situation here with the Uber drivers and everything. So JP Morgan Chase did this study by actually monitoring 39 million Chase bank accounts, and they looked at the deposits of over 128 platforms and what the deposits incoming were, and they recorded that and they produced this study. This is all real data and stuff like that taken from their customer base. The interesting part about this study is there was one class of people making money from apps through the gig economy that their income went up. And guess what class that was?
I mean, Marxists should have no question about it. You know, what kind of person that would be? It'd be people who own property that they can rent out.
Yes, so if you were a rentier using Airbnb or some other similar app, you actually were making almost 70% more, and you would have seen your income go up to about $1,736 on average per month, which is, if you look at it, like we said earlier, average income of people in the transportation end of it and the worker end of it making, and I do excuse myself here, it was the exact number was 783, so yeah, it was definitely more than 500, but still, this is less than half of what they were making, but also the people that own properties making a lot more, obviously.
This is so sad. Can we just exterminate all landlords?
This is so sad. Alexa, play Despacito.
Don't say the A word. I already made that joke. I actually did that in the Raiders chat one time. I've recorded myself saying that. I don't know if I triggered anybody's Alexa though. I hope I did. That would be funny.
That'd be great. Because Alexa is like the best trolling tool. Never own one. If you're a leftist, because you're just inviting the police to spy on you. You shouldn't have an Alexa. You shouldn't. It's like,
yeah, Alexa is literally like, it is literally just inviting police to listen in on you.
She has a second job for the Fed.
like it is most definitely used by like police and like FBI and NSA in US, for example. Like that they would definitely use it to crack down on like, you know, anyone really, or at least spy on them and then crack down on them when they figured it all out, or build up a network of people and then crack down on them.
Yeah, but the whole thing with the Uber scenario really is, and the big takeaway here is this is the end result of killing labor power. And this is in many ways working for Uber or for one of these apps essentially just surrenders any power of labor to these people, because then they could just adjust the apps to not accept any changes in. So that way, if let's say you did organize together a bunch of Uber workers in your city and made a list of demands, well, the people that run Uber could say, well, you know, the app just can't do that. You know, it's the system. We can't do it. And they could make it a lot harder for people under the guise of, well, it just can't do that. We're really sacrificing a lot of labor power, but it still is important that really Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, Postmates, etc., all those people really should consider organizing regardless if they do work in that industry, simply because having that organization and being able to withhold that labor, it does create a stopgap within the system.
And you know, it scares the bourgeois as well, because they know that, you know, they're losing all that capital, those workers, and them actually doing something signifies that, that they're not just sitting there complacent as most people have been for however fucking long it's been. How long has the trade union movement been dead in the US for?
Since the 1970s, really. The end of the Carter administration, beginning of Reagan is really kind of where it just dropped off dead. But it's kind of been in slow decline since the 50s. Like, it peaked in about 55. Remained sort of steady with a little downward incline from up until about the late 70s. Then Carter and then Reagan happened, and they both kind of passed some laws that were more neoliberal in orientation that caused just labor unions and the power of labor unions to decline. And so now we have it where you had like almost 40% of the country was labor in the 1950s, or were unionized in the 1950s, and now it's less than 10%.
That's pretty incredible, but weren't most of those people like industrial kind of workers and that? Because I know a lot of heavy industry has moved out of the US. It's been outsourced to Asia, where there's cheap labor there for to be exploited, pretty much.
A lot of the union jobs were industrial jobs. A lot of unionized jobs currently are public sector jobs. That makes up the bulk majority of them. There are like construction worker jobs and stuff like that are commonly unionized. Trade jobs are usually unionized in the US. But as far as like general jobs, another thing that really kind of placed a stopgap in organizing is that the technology sector, which kind of just, of course, rapidly expanded from the 70s onward, they were really anti-union as well.
Well, a lot of them started as like garage companies. Like every single game company that's big now started in garage. All the computer companies were started in garage with a group of friends. So like a union, what's that? Why do we need that? We don't need that. It's just red tape. We all get along, we all have fun. Yeah, we're working like 16 hours a day, but it's fun, and this is like our passion, our dream. And now all those tech companies are giant multi-billion-dollar companies with hundreds of thousands of employees all over the world. So like,
right, and a lot of people that join software companies are from petty bourgeois backgrounds or just upper middle class, well-to-do people, because that's the kind of people that can afford the kind of training or the college to get into those kind of jobs. So they have this anti-union background they've come from. So they don't see themselves as needing a union either, because I work for a great company. It's a meritocracy, and if you put in the work and everything, you'll get rewarded. And then it turns out like a lot of these workspaces, especially for like software companies, especially game companies, it's hell world when you work for them. They're like hopped up on drugs trying to cram for a software release in like 2 days when they've had 6 months or more to work on the game.
It's also like you said before, that the companies try and cultivate this image of we're just like a little friendly, close-knit company kind of thing, sort of like you said when they were in like run from garages. They're trying to cultivate that image as well, especially in a lot of tech companies, is what I've seen, is they try and cultivate this, we work hard and play hard, we have fun and shit like that at work.
One of those companies like Amazon really does have very anti-union kind of bent towards it, I guess, if you will. Or actually, they are vocally anti-union, I should say. In fact, they're so anti-union that they released a training video for their management on how to deal with union organizers and how to spot organizers. And I'm going to admit, I wasn't able to watch this video in time for the show. Like, it was on my to-do list.
You can't. Well, so far as I know, you can't. As far as I know is that...
okay.
To protect the source, apparently this video is highly localized to, like, the region of Amazon warehouse that this video was sent to, and there were different versions, so in order to not, like, reveal their source...
Oh, they did the thing where if you create a document, you put in some typos or different words here and there so that if the document gets leaked, you can tell where it came from?
Well, it was a video, right? So I think
same thing, but same principle, but like there were adjustments in the video between...
Right.
Okay.
Right. So they didn't release a video, so you can't actually see the video.
Yeah, it's not a full video. It's like a clip from it, and it's sort of like it's traits of people organizing is them suddenly being with workers and not talking to their managers and shit like that. And it's like, you need to watch out for this because that means they may be organizing.
If the workers are kind of hanging out together, if there are workers that don't normally hang out like they shouldn't be, like they work different departments, that's a big one. When I worked for the credit union, they actually had advisors that were telling the management there that we would get looked at like if I went to lunch and I hung out with my friend Jimmy or whatever that was in I don't know, credit cards. I'm not gonna reveal names here, but let's just say you worked credit cards and I was an MSR. So our work generally we would cross each other on the phones from time to time because you got to call credit cards, but you kind of get the idea. Like it's not somebody that I would be working next.
Not your fellow slave in your fellow slave department.
Right, exactly. So like if I started having lunch with Jimmy every day, then they might think, well, Jimmy on his break he hangs out with so and so, and like they try to put together like what the network is, and it's ridiculous. But there's all sorts of different things that they do. Like companies even go like as far as spying on their employees, like social media, looking at, are they talking about things like living wages? Like, so even if you don't mention at work, maybe you mentioned it on your Facebook or your Twitter and they found out who you are. And now you're under, and you're subject
to your boss, you're a furry.
Exactly. So now you're subject to whatever unfair criticisms or inspections or whatever they seem, Yeah,
social media in general is a trap. Like if you're going to engage on social media,
make a persona and then you
make a persona or be a liberal about it. Don't go on Facebook and start talking about communism under your actual name.
Yeah, and be a fox too if you're going to make a persona.
Yes, and
we are awesome. We are
I can agree with that.
Awesome, majestic creatures here. In fact, we have 3 very, very beautiful, fluffy foxes in here right now. I didn't even have to watch it or watch the clip to kind of know what it was because I worked for Walmart a long time ago, and Walmart spends an entire day or 2, I don't remember what it was. Training is 5 days, and you spend training in orientation, doing lesson modules and stuff like that on the computer and all these activities and stuff. But one of the days that you spend training is dedicated to anti-union material, just telling you how bad unions are and how they're going to cheat you. And if you sign a union card, they got you for life kind of thing. It's the kinds of stuff that they said was just outrageous and obnoxious. And so I already kind of know what the content is just from having that. And plus, on top of that, Home Depot's anti-union video, which is very similar to Walmart's video, got leaked online. And that bad boy is even worse because it's like a 2-hour rant about how bad unions are. And I wouldn't even call it a movie. It's just them talking about how bad unions are for 2 hours.
Yeah, it's incredible the lengths that they go to just, I guess, discredit unions in a sense and just demonize them is quite incredible.
Right, and if you really think about it, is it worth their time to even really do this? Because honestly, when I first saw the video at Walmart, the first thing that I did is I went out and I looked up what the heck unions were.
They speak such a different language than us, and they frequently think that we speak the same language. I mean, that's why work jargon flies over the head of most workers, because it's why would I care? It's such a different language, and so they expect workers to already know what unions are. And the ironic thing is that they've erased the history so successfully. Most workers aren't even aware when they work, they're adding value to the company. Most workers don't even make that connection. Going to work is just a routine motor function that they have to do because society or something, right? A lot of workers literally think they're doing it to make society run, as if they were already living in a socialist economy. Most people don't realize, no, the work you're doing is building the company that you get no part in, that gets to kick your butt out the door whenever it wants. The idea of a union is like alien to most people.
A lot of people don't even know what it is because, like you said, the history and concepts are really buried, and they don't really, for the most part, teach it in schools unless they really have like an anti-union bent, or they'll teach it as something like it's a historical artifact. It was useful back in the day when people were working 16-hour days, but people don't do that anymore. But people do it now, and that's the difference, is that because unions haven't had power in 30, 40 years or so, that we are in this situation.
Exactly. The power that we built was destroyed. The history that we lived was erased. And now we're back at square one, where this stuff is like an alien concept to people. Like, it's like this brand new idea. Like, Bernie Sanders stood up and was able to peddle lukewarm, bare bones, basics, European social democracy to America, and it was like it had never heard of it before.
And I know it scared a lot of people there as well, because it's like you said, we're back to square one, like history's gone back in time.
Well, the other thing is that America is so isolated, like news-wise. I spoke to you about this, Armal, the other day. Like, you'd ask me, like, why is a lot of our stories American-centric? It's so hard to get good news about what is happening overseas in America in 2018 when the freaking internet exists, because not only are our news sources just so focused inwards on the American circus, the other thing is that real news just gets buried by the search engine. The World Socialist website, for instance, that has great news articles on there from time to time, pretty in-depth stuff. They get delisted off of Google. You have to actually search specifically for them, searching for their topics or articles, because their articles otherwise just don't show up on Google. And it's the same with so many other websites out there in these times, which we have a great segment here that was inspired by them. Counterpunch, Truthdig, Alternet, even some of them like Telesaur gets delisted from Google and from social media websites now. Any organization out there that doesn't toe the line with mainstream media, it just disappears. So the vast majority of Americans don't know about a lot of the stuff that we cover. They don't know that there are people, even in their own communities, necessarily organizing half the time, because that doesn't even get covered. Much less the Yemen story that we've covered here on the show. And that's the world that Americans live in. We are isolated and we are fed either worldview A or worldview B, and you live in universe A or universe B, and that's it. And everybody else that's independent of that, their views aren't indexed and they don't get a voice.
Yeah, and increasingly, the people who live in Universe A and live in Universe B aren't living in Universe A and Universe B anymore, because it has no bearing on their lives. It's tuned out. Like the whole Russia thing, less than 1% of Americans actually seriously care about that. And the more they talk about it, studies show the fewer people care.
The fewer people care because it doesn't affect Americans
in a day-to-day life.
Right.
They go to the store. The Russians haven't made their food prices go up or down. The Russians haven't fixed their car or broken their car. The Russians haven't given their wages a raise or their raises fall. That means nothing. And so you end up with this propaganda machine that is increasingly less and less effective. Now, most people can't put together, and I don't know why it was happened so fast for me, when someone sat me down and like just really quickly explained it and suddenly like everything connected. Most people know this. Like, most people are tuning this out. Most people know that these are lies, but they don't know how to put anything in its place. People right now are looking for a new ethic. They're looking for a new set of actions to make the world make sense. A lot of it is confused and befuddled, and it'll be progressive in one sentence and then reactionary in the next. I remember when I got a traffic ticket, I was standing outside a court for the Pay Us Now hearing or whatever, and there was a guy talking about how He had been through the court system, was always in and out of jail because he owes all this money, and every time he gets out, they charge him for the money they had to spend on him when he was in there, and how's he going to pay that? He can't keep a job, get a job because he's been in prison. And then his solution was to tax homeless people and take everything from them because they're an actual burden on society, and he's actually trying to get his life together. So like it becomes this jumbled freaking mess, which is where the fascists walk in and say it's the Jews. And for a lot of people that makes the thing make sense. And then like you said, the news erases people doing organization locally, so people don't hear about it. So our word spreads a lot slower.
Right, which is why I continuously hammer that we need to create our own social networks and our own mechanisms and our own microphones that we own. Because if we don't, then everything's just going to get filtered out. Whereas if we do have platforms, people can migrate to those platforms and will eventually migrate to those platforms. And eventually you will get a critical mass. But the thing is people have to be willing to take those first steps. And part of those first steps is that a few of these systems, a few of these projects are going to fail.
So why do you think the left spread so fast and furry? Because essentially we have that. Now, it's grown less and less in our hands over time. 2008, we completely owned Fur Affinity. Furries didn't really do their business over Twitter. There was no Patreon. And we moved money through PayPal, and that was one of the few things we didn't have a furry alternative for. We had a furry alternative for art streaming. There was fursuit supplies where furries bought the supplies for building fursuits directly from other furries. And so a lot of that has been eroded, but essentially we still have our networks. And we need to reclaim that, by the way. We need to get off of Twitter. We need to take back FA, and we need to repatriate our infrastructure, or the same thing is going to happen to us, and we're just going to fall victim to the algorithm.
If you're a furry, snouts.online is great Mastodon instant. Ran by the Barking Points people, by the way, so plug out to them for doing that. Thank you. It's great. Now, if you're not a furry and you still want to join Mastodon and you still want to see all the great stuff that gets posted on snouts.online, hey, guess what? It's federated. That means you could see what any other instance does. Just go to mastodon.social, sign up for an account there, and every other instance that they are federated with, you'll get to see that too. You'll get to interact with those people. It works just like Twitter does, except it's dispersed. And actually, I like it a little bit better than Twitter, because Twitter, you get to see the metrics and everything. Well, they don't have a method of really counting the metrics because it is more decentralized. But I think that actually, it stops the popularity contest so that people can really just be themselves and stop trying to present and front. And what you get is you get a more laid back, honestly funnier. I like a lot of the people on there. They are pretty funny. And then they just post a lot of cooler stuff that you really either wouldn't see on Twitter because it's just too laid back for Twitter, or it's it just isn't Twitter worthy. It just doesn't fit the algorithm or the format. Because with Twitter, you're always about self promotion, and you're thinking about who's gonna like what, who's gonna retweet what's gonna blow you up. And you don't have to think about that on Mastodon. And I think that's refreshing that for once there's a social network out there where everybody's not just jerking off to the idea that they got to be popular.
Not to be rude, but that just sounded like a massive shill for it.
Massive shill for Mastodon. Yeah, it is. By the way, Mastodon is not paying me to do this, by the way.
Yeah, no, we're doing this because it's the next best alternative.
Yeah.
We really need to talk about democratic infrastructure of the internet, period. The internet was not built from, the very early days of how to even log into a BBS board where, it was on one person's server and people had to ask permission, to the entire way that a web form or a website is set up with administrators that get their buddies to be other administrators, and then they just hammer around their rules and what they build and the shitty things that they build.
Funny you should say that. One of the people that created the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, is working on several projects to address that exact same situation and is working towards building a more decentralized internet. He's kind of realized where the internet's going, and it when the creator of the internet is saying that he's scared about the future that the internet is creating and that it's a danger to society and the organization of society, that's very telling. And so one of the projects that he's created is called Solid, and it's essentially just a data platform, to my understanding. I don't know much about it, and just kind of just spawned naturally organic, so I don't have any notes to go off on this one, but it is really cool. The people that created the internet, that were part of that from the beginning, see the problem and are addressing it, which is great. And then there's a lot of people out there. One of them listens to the show, I believe, goes by Dead Superhero on Mastodon as well. He created Diaspora, which is a similar social network, but more in the vein of like Facebook's like visual format. But if Facebook didn't look like fucking garbage, pardon my language, because it doesn't have all the ads and stuff to gunk it up. And it runs faster. It's pretty nice. It's projects like that where there's not a profit motive or anything like that, and you own all your data that you put on there, that I really do see that's going to be the future of the internet if things go well, if we're able to take it back from the silos that have been created. I really did want to kind of get back with the core issue that we were talking about, the unions here and everything, because one of the things that I actually wanted to get to here was that there's more than one type of union as well. So, of course, you have the labor union, and their big thing is, of course, organizing workers. That's very important. But the other thing is like, you work, but then you go home and you have a place to live. And sometimes that place is not all that great. Sometimes it's atrocious. That's where tenant unions come in, actually, where let's say you have an abusive landlord that doesn't take care of the property, doesn't hold up their end of the deal, or rips you off. You organize with other tenants, and that's exactly what tenants in Palm Beach County have done, where they organized against an apartment complex called Stony Brook, and it's owned by Millennia Housing Management. And this apartment complex is so disgusting. It's actually been on national news. This apartment complex has been featured nationally. The people that live here, the reason that they are organizing is because this apartment is literally unlivable. And it's so bad that when it was actually featured on the news and the news reporters were there reporting on it, the apartment management called the cops on the reporters, and they have consistently called the cops on anybody with video camera equipment, anybody trying to showcase what's going on here. And that's why these people have gotten together, created this union. It's gotten that bad, and people are literally dying in this place. They've been hospitalized. They've had infants get sick with lung infections from the black mold that is just all over the walls and the ceilings and the insides of this place.
I figure the tenants are probably trapped too by like extremely ridiculous leases.
See, that's the game, right? So, and they don't even have to trap them in their lease. The other tenant companies look at how good of a customer somebody is. Like, you build up history with these companies, and they actually have records of how good of a customer you are. So are you complaining all the time? Do you pay your rent on time? And then the second thing they do is they look at your credit score as well. And I can guarantee you, if these people are living in these conditions, they probably don't have the best credit score either. Between other apartment complexes requiring referrals and information from other apartment complexes to sign on new leasers, and the credit score requirements, you can bet that these people they have a hard time moving out, and they probably are being built for every other dollar that they have so that they can't move out.
probably a fee for mounting a complaint.
So they can't do that. That's the fortunate part. So they can't do that. They can come close to doing it. They can charge you for actually doing the thing. The last place that I lived in before, they actually made it impossible to get the light fixture out to change the light bulbs. Said that they don't change out the light bulb. And I said, well, we can't get this thing open. And at the time, my roommate was this big dude, and he couldn't even get it open without almost cracking the dome. And he just said, nope, I'm not going to touch it after this. And we called him up, and the guy that came around and fixed the light bulbs, he's like, oh, yeah, you need this special tool right here, and it goes in the hole right here, and then you slide it out. And it's like you'd have never figured this thing out. And then he's like, after you do that, then you just twist it off. And puts in the light bulb, and then we get charged like $10 for like not the light bulb itself, but the changing of the light bulb, because we already supplied the light bulb.
It's such a, like, honestly, just get a 10-year-old Winnebago, go live in the woods. No,
I mean, if you can do that, yes. Yeah, I mean, at this point, like, that really is like the best thing for so many people. I mean, really, it's something else. But the way that this actually works here with the tenant unions, if you are in a situation like this, the best thing that you can do is unionize with other tenants, and then collectively, not individually, withhold rent, because you can legally withhold rent yourself, but they're going to make it really hard for you. But if you do it collectively, where there's more than one person joining in, suddenly that's not $600 or $1,000 or whatever the heck it is they're charging a month for it that they're missing out. It starts adding up. You're legally allowed to do that as long as you set it aside and prove that you have it set aside. But the other thing is that you do need to understand is, just like any other organizing, it is risky business. In fact, the people that have engaged in unionizing and those that support it too have found their cars vandalized. They've been harassed. People need to be ready for that, but we also need to make sure that we're not being pushovers about this kind of thing.
How it even began who was the communist who lived in this condition, who went to all of his neighbors and for months and months fought through their deadpan faces to explain, you can withhold the rent because you make the value, and without you they have nothing, and we can solve this and get this done. Finally convince them all to do it,
and that you're legally protected in most states to do it. Yeah. So,
like, how did that even happen? And that has to happen all over the place, consistently, all the time, in order for us to end this scam that we're stuck in. Because the more I think about it, the more capitalism is really just nothing else than a legalized, organized scam. That's how we have to end it. It's really hard working with Americans because the history has been erased. And you just look at some of the stuff and you think, how was this even put together?
Well, yeah, and we actually did have in the past some very, very creative solutions to housing that were actually done by labor organizers very early in the 20th century, actually. Believe it or not, back in the mid 1910s and early 20s in New York, in a response to the industrialization that was going on, and during the Industrial Revolution at its height, people couldn't afford to live in New York City, and yet they were there, and they were there because they were living 10 and 20 people to a small one-bedroom apartment. The living standards were just unbelievably bad, and while today it's not gotten that bad, I mean, we're certainly on track to that, to where people can't afford an apartment. And nowadays, like, you wouldn't even be legally allowed to do that. Like, you'd just be simply kicked out. Nowadays, it's even gotten to the point where businesses would just rather have their employees out on the street than do anything about it. But labor unions and socialists actually got together, and they created housing co-ops in the early 20th century that lasted a good part of the 20th century.
Now, socialism, communism was something that most everyone had some sort of familiarity with then. How do you build that now when, like, Bernie Sanders is a political radical? You approach people like with ideas like this, you just get looked at like you're a bug.
Well, see, the interesting thing is like these solutions weren't that radical. They were just housing co-ops. This was people getting together, pooling in
then
resources.
They weren't radical.
Yeah.
But now today, that's like a whoa, that could never happen. That's impossible. Oh, I'd lose my job. Oh, I get evicted. Oh, but the more we give to the job creators, the better we all are. You say as you scrape top ramen, yesterday's top ramen that you only eat half of to stretch your food for a week. How? It's really hard.
It really is. A lot of it is knowing history, which has been forgotten. And people need to learn the history, need to learn where they came from and how we got there and how we got here. And there's a great article in the magazine called In These Times that covered the co-op situation in New York and the history behind that. And it was a great article. It was very in-depth, and it went into how in 1916 that a bunch of Finnish socialists got together. It was like 16 families, and only 6 of them really had enough money to kind of pull in, and they had to kind of get money from the rest of the neighborhood, and they got like a $25,000 loan from the bank as well to kind of cover it once they had enough on-hand resources that the bank would lend to them. And they went out there and they created a housing co-op that everybody could live in. And then on top of that, they also created essentially a neighborhood around the co-op. That they created like grocery stores and a bakery, and so that when people went out, they had to spend money on goods or whatever, they could do it within the co-op or within the neighborhood, and the money got repatriated back to the workers, and everybody was much better for it. This really kind of kicked off in New York a whole movement of co-ops where the Finnish people did it, and they were wildly successful. They filled these tenements up pretty fast, and suddenly you have people in the Bronx that were Yiddish communists looking over there and saying, hey, these Finnish guys, they got a great idea. Let's do this too. Just the level of engagement here to create these things was just, it's something that isn't seen today. And it's because people don't know that this stuff happened.
No, and they will never know unless...
Yeah, because history is like really controlled now to favor the status quo.
Yeah, it's all about controlling the narrative, which means that this kind of stuff gets let out. But this is the kind of stuff like, this is socialists and communists doing something that is tangible. Because everybody always asks, like, what is it in this country that socialists or communists have done? What is it that unions have done in this country? And this is the kind of stuff that gets forgotten. They took this, like the Yiddish communists that built their co-op, they like expanded on the idea. They created even more tenements. They made it bigger and better than the Finnish communist or the Finnish socialists did. And all of a sudden, they have a huge neighborhood in place where it's more than just the grocery store, the bakery. Like they put in a library and a square where they can discuss politics and just.
So like one of the tweets that really resonated with me is something I would say in 2018, but it essentially was a mockery of this sort of extremely online communists quote organizing. It was something like, knock knock, oh hey, did you know that the average per capita caloric intake in the Soviet Union in 1975 was 3,000 calories a day? I didn't know that. Maybe communism is worth investigating. Like, it was lampooning how that doesn't really affect or reach anyone. And so I'm wondering, like, sending people to history class, is that quite, like I said before, people are looking for a new ethic, and all you kind of have to do is just sort of serve up that ethic
So the thing that we got to do is we got to teach people this isn't foreign, right? So like people are of course going to have a negative reaction to, oh, by the way, the Soviet Union wasn't really all that bad, regardless of facts. Facts don't matter in this instance, because you're arguing with somebody that has an emotional level response to this thing that is foreign to them. So what you have to do is you have to show them what we did accomplish in America, in their own backyards, what their grandparents and great-grandparents and their parents before that
this literally was their great-grandparents.
Yeah, and did and built in this country. You have to show them that to really allow for this to happen, because otherwise you do get this reaction that it is something foreign to them and they're just going to reject it. The Yiddish communists and the Finnish socialists that created the first co-ops in New York, they didn't build it out of nowhere. These people were union people. Like they busted their ass and then they were coming home to nothing. And so they got together and they organized the same way that they organized for work. It is a confidence thing. It's an understanding thing. It is a history thing. Like people need to understand the history behind all of this, because otherwise it all gets lost. It all gets buried, and then people like this would be all people know, and then there is no hope. There's no way out of it because people don't see it, and that's the point. That all of these people, the Finnish, the Yiddish, they realized that they had power within labor, and if they had power within labor, they could have power elsewhere. And they went up to build these kind of things. And these people were visionaries. And like all of this stuff was happening in the 1920s, and during the same time period, while both of these people were going on, there was a guy, his name was Abraham Kazan, and he was watching both of these projects, and he was really, really active on the left. He came from the Ukraine to the United States in 1904, and he was 15 years old. He was really influenced by the anarchist ideas that were being floated around in that area of the world at the time. And then he went to New Jersey and he started up a proto-kibbutz. And then after that, he helped organize a garment shop. And then he went on staff with the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and then created Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America, which was one of the largest clothing unions in the United States for textiles. And then he created a cooperative using that during World War I, he was able to provide 7,000 union members with sugar and matzo during World War I, which it was during this time period.
Oh, so this wasn't sent over.
Yeah, so it was like during this time period of World War I, where he also kind of saw, like the carnage and stuff like that going on, but he was also looking at what was happening in New York as well with the Finnish and then later with the Yiddish, and he decided that Amalgamated was going to create the biggest co-op ever in terms of like housing, and that's what he did. And it was also around the same time period that New York, because this was the 1920s, and New York was still having problems growing their economy, and like even though like they were producing capital and stuff like that, they had a problem because there weren't any buyers really, and so these new class of people were the buyers. This was like the emerging of the middle class here. So New York actually created laws at the time period that allowed like things like tax abatement and stuff like that for these housing cooperatives to get built.
When I think of a co-op, I sort of have a tainted vision of the beanie wearing, big bearded leftist with a goat and a shack that he's built, and three more of them with another shack. You look at these pictures, and these are towers. They're not skyscrapers, but these are like 15-story buildings, like with balconies on each apartment, and these are pretty huge. In fact, it reminds me of there's a video on YouTube that's about these American women who went over to the Soviet Union and filmed the way that their neighborhoods were set up, and the buildings look a lot like that. and where the shops are, and you can all walk to the shops and the restaurants, and it's all under the cooperative. And it looks like they just picked up this part of the Soviet Union and dropped it in New York.
Right, and these buildings, they weren't like Spartan bare buildings either. These were beautiful buildings, and they were huge, and they would have been humongous at the time. These would have been some of the largest building and developments in New York during their day. The first one was 1,500 people. Then the Yiddish created one, 2,500, and then Kazan was even larger, and then it just kind of blew up from there. It was, and each one got bigger and bigger with more and more amenities within the co-op, because they realized that as they grew these things and could expand them out, they could get more services. Kazan's co-op had the grocery store, had the milk delivery, which was necessary back in the day because you didn't have a refrigerator necessarily. You had an ice box, so you had to have certain cold food like milk delivered to you every day.
And the ice.
Right, and the ice too, yeah.
Which you picked up with these giant scissor things. Ridiculous, but I mean, it was hard, like, to build towers like this.
Yeah.
It's an investment. Like, it would have even been easier to go and build this in the middle of Pennsylvania. That this was done in New York and succeeded is a testament to the entire concept of socialist economics.
So really, like, the downfall of this movement, though, was kind of like in two phases, because it was really booming, and really by the 1950s, everything looked like this was going to be the future of housing in New York and every major city in the United States. So this was the way to go. This was the solution to the problem. What happened, though, is that around the 1950s, this is really kind of when desegregation started happening. New York just finally wanted to clear out all the slums. But so did the cooperatives, and so they had a vested interest. And so in many ways, the cooperatives did kind of take a deal with the devil to clear out the slums. And of course, the city got to build in the highways through some of the slum clearances, and then the co-ops were able to take the rest of the land and build some co-ops here and there. And so what you had you had the land go to three parcels. You had the wealthy white people that would move in to private luxury owned apartments and tenements. Then you had the middle class white people who would live in the co-ops. And then you had the poorer, mostly African American, Hispanic, etc. They lived in the remainder of the slum. And they were just pushed in. And then while all this is happening, all of the white people that could, because this is when the highways were built, and this is what the highways were built for, they left, and they left for the suburbs. So you had this whole movement that accidentally spurred on white flight. And the interior of the cities just started slowly becoming more and more dilapidated and dysfunctional during this period, like right after the 50s. So even though they were able to start building larger and larger, and the largest co-op was Co-op City in the Bronx in the 1960s.
And I'm looking at the picture of it.
And it's huge.
Groundbreaking. I'm looking at the picture at the head of the article of its groundbreaking, and it really captures the entire change you're talking about, because up front there's all the government suits and the capitalists who put up the money, the governor standing there with a fake smile with his arm around this little black boy who's just the most "are you serious" look on his face. And so you got all the suits up there with all the black and all the white children standing together, and then all the actual labor and the people living there who built it in the background. And it's the most perfect defining picture for what you're talking about.
Right, and that was a photo op. The reason that this photo looks like it does is this photo is actually staged. Of course. So one of the things that the co-ops really wanted to do, because by the time of the 1950s, most co-ops were still white middle class. these people really did want to get into integrating the communities. And Co-op City was one of a few major projects where they did try integration, but this was kind of like before the ideas of intersectionality and like understanding like common struggles and stuff like that. So what happened is that just like today, like white people didn't want to hear it. And so you had like Co-op City was somewhat successful, but they ran into business problems basically where they couldn't get the funding that they needed because of increased costs and stuff like that. Inflation was going on. It was the 70s. It was a really bad time economically. But also they had a capital strike where the city of New York actually ran into a budget crisis in 1975. And this was one of the first things to go was these kind of projects. And so what essentially happened is that by the 1970s, even though you had Co-op City built and everything seemed to be great, Co-op City was running into problems with the budgets, and people were rent striking and withholding rent and stuff like that because stuff just wasn't getting done. The rents were going up so fast just because of stagflation. It was a very terrible time.
And that left really the only recourse because the capitalists on Wall Street were withholding money from the city government. So city government couldn't do anything. The only place to go for these co-ops was, into the jaws of death to go and ask these capitalists for money. I assume that's what they did. It's the only thing that they could do.
Basically what happened is that because the co-ops were getting money from the city, before what was going on with the earlier co-ops, it was all neighborhood and investment. Like the amalgamated co-op that we discussed earlier, they got their money from their own bank. They actually created their own bank for union members. Like this is how powerful unions were. This is how in the community unions were back then. And nobody remembers this. This is not something that's taught in history. But by the 19th...
It's funny because it's like this is the 70s. Like this isn't, for most people, this probably isn't their parents. Well, yeah, actually for half people it's probably their parents. For the other half it's their grandparents. And it's not like that's talked about even like among family. Of course it's not in the actual history. But it's weird that it's not even talked about around the dinner table.
What essentially happened, though, is that when the white flight occurred and a large portion of the middle class and the tax base moved out into the suburbs, it took a lot of industry with it because a lot of the industry moved out to these peripheral towns as well that surrounded New York. So because so much of the co-op infrastructure by the 60s and 70s was actually dependent on the city as well, things like Co-op City were running into the budget shortfalls and everything simply because the tax base was no longer there to fund these projects. What essentially happened is that in New York City, for instance, back in the 60s and 70s, you could go to City University in New York, and if you were a New York citizen, your tuition was paid. The fares on the subway were really cheap. The city had all of these services, and then in 1975, Wall Street orchestrated a capital strike because what happened is because the tax base had been removed, the city moved to bonds. And so Wall Street held these bonds, and then essentially just Wall Street held on to these bonds and just refused to pay them. And it was called a capital strike. And Wall Street refused to give the bond money over until they formed an emergency financial control board, and it was made up of corporate banking elites. And the first thing that they did was they went out and they got rid of all these programs. They cut back on the co-op housing and stuff like that, and eventually eliminated it. They hiked up the subway fares and everything. And this is really when 75 was really when New York City went into this deep decline. And this is when you hear about New York City during the 1980s, how the urban decay and the slums and everything.
That part that's permanently stuck in the mythos of every conservative's mind of the horrible big bad part of the city and the dangerous crime. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, so this is what caused all of that. And of course, at the same time, like you were talking about crime, the conservative image of New York City and so many other big cities, this was the same time that essentially it was just a few years off from when the CIA was working with the drug cartels to flood America's streets with crack cocaine. All of this stuff was going on around about the same time, just a few years off from each other. See, it's the budget crisis in 75, starting down with the shutdown of so many of these projects up until the 80s.
And there was like no need for it either.
Yeah.
Like it was literally just, let's get rid of the black people in the city. Like there wasn't, like the black people weren't even... Like these co-ops, honestly, yeah, they were great, but they weren't posing a threat to capitalism. Like they could have just existed.
Part of the reason that they were able to be created in many parts, and the reason that so many, like late in their history, that they were funded by the city. The city wanted these co-ops to exist during this time period because it meant that people had money to spend it elsewhere. And that's why when the co-ops were...
I mean, that's the basics of Keynesian economics.
These people just totally forgot how economics worked within capitalism, and then oops, it all just it fell apart. And this history, just like we said, it's not very well known, but in many ways, like this was within its time period. This was revolutionary. This was something that had really never been done before, and it worked. The second that it was removed, that began the real decline of New York City.
I guess that makes me like an extremely online Marxist-Leninist, because I'm looking at the header picture of this article. It's Co-op City, a limited profit. Oh, you're just social democrats. Oh, what's that standing right behind the sign? Oh, it's a cop. But like, you're right. I mean, it worked for a time being. I guess my question is...
This is the kind of solutions that we need to be working with right now to get people on board, because you're not going to get people on board straight away with revolution. It's right. Not going to happen. In fact...
But then I have to ask, what was this co-op's view of the class struggle?
Okay, so this one was created by Kazan. And Kazan was really broken about the failure of this. Like he died in 71. He never really got to see Co-op City really work, because it was being attacked constantly by the city, by the struggle between capitalists and the city and everything, and just everything that was going on. And he came from a leftist background. This guy was a union organizer, and he was an anarchist, and he understood these kind of struggles, but he lived in the real world. He had to make real world decisions, and this is how he realized that he could best serve everybody. That this was the impact that he could have, and this was a great impact for hundreds of thousands of people in New York City.
I'm just sort of wondering, like, the class struggle being so apparent, living in this co-op, having it constantly under attack, I have to wonder why it didn't just seize all of its own property rather than, response to the capital strike, rather than just go and
because living there was much better than living under a regular apartment. So people really didn't want to risk that, because these rents were half of what you would have paid if you'd have rented for a landlord. And they really did. Like, the members owned the property, basically. Like, they were a co-op. When you are a member of a co-op, you are an owner. So these people, in effect, did actually own what they were living in.
It's just hard to see it be taken apart by the very beginnings of neoliberalism so easily. I mean, they must have fought, right?
They did, and the thing is you know what's the most painful thing about this entire story is that, do you know who headlined and really railed to dismantle this entire movement within New York City?
Great co-ops, the greatest. I've always supported co-ops, the biggest co-ops, just the biggest.
Yes, Fred and Donald Trump. Donald Trump and his dad. That is who...
We're gonna make the biggest co-op.
As dim as it looks, is one of the guys who essentially assisted and orchestrated against all of this towards the end there in the 70s and the 80s so that he could put up his luxury apartments and his fancy hotels. And
that's what's literally standing there today, or those buildings demolished?
No, some of those buildings were demolished. Some of these, like Co-op City, still exists. It's,
like in the form of Co-op City?
Yes.
Or just the buildings there?
So
in the form of Co-op City.
Yeah, so Co-op City's still there, and there's a few of the other co-ops that are still there. About 100,000 people still live in cooperative housing in New York, and so it still is there. This is a part of our history that needs to be remembered, because this is what labor unions can do for average American.
So speaking of the labor movement, relating back to a speech I read by, I think it was Eugene Debs who gave the speech, sort of about the corruption in unions. Are unions good or bad, etc., etc. It says here, in terms of rebuilding these co-ops and building new ones, predictably the developers are seeking to build as much as possible with non-union labor, provoking a showdown with New York City's building trades. A drumbeat of job actions is intensifying in Hudson Yards, with weekly pickets and the beginnings of a guerrilla war of walkouts and slowdowns. Sadly, the trades are divided. So this gets at the heart now of the sort of labor aristocracy that's been built, where a union, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, invested in the construction of one of the luxury towers to go up in the place of these co-ops. And the union does not support the other unions in protest. And what it's saying here, and that is exactly what, predicted to happen by people like Debs and the very first union organizers, is that increasingly the rank and file carpenters are joining the strikes and the refusal to build and the work slowdowns of the erasure.
Right, and that's where things like the IWW come into play. Even though they're non-political and they don't endorse candidates, which actually I think is the best route to go. Because, like we said, you only get so far with that. Their big thing is direct action. That instead of campaigning instead of using the ideology as you had so eloquently put it earlier, they go out and they organize. They work to get it actually done. Yeah, you're going to run into corporate unions that they're going to have a deal with, whatever, and they're compromised. But
woke workers know what's in their best interest when they're paying attention. Again, you look at this, and maybe it's good that it's in trades, right? It's in carpenter and the people that build things. Maybe even though it's such a small part of the economy now and service work is so huge, maybe it's not that much of a detriment that the labor movement is reawakening inside of the trades that actually physically build the world. It's so hard to start a union in service work, which is extremely unstable, unskilled.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, that is a very important aspect and lens to look at it through. But the other thing is like, as far as unions go, and we hit on this all the time on the show, but like the IWW it's not super formalized in a way, and it's a great union to join because of how it's organized. Because when you join the IWW, let's say like you work at a store and you would like to organize your store, the IWW is less concerned with everybody joining the IWW than they are just the goal of getting everybody in. They don't care if your union joins like the grocers union or the Communication Workers of America or whatever. They care about the mission here, and that is the actual organization. And the other thing is they're willing to work with people who all they want to do is organize, but not even necessarily join a union, because you don't have to be part of a union to organize. And that's what I think a lot of people get confused about. And
all the strikes that have been effective in the past year have been wildcat strikes, or unions that were formed overnight for this purpose of carrying out this strike or this action.
Exactly. That's why organization is so important, because you don't have to even have the union to have the organizing, and it's still legal. It's still perfectly legal to organize without a union. And your employer can get in a lot of trouble for retaliating against organizing workers, even if they're not in a union. And workers...
Now, that's like the next thing that's going to go.
Right.
And we also have to think de facto versus de jure here, right? Like, in what places are the police or the courts going to care that the employer stepped on the workers who are organizing? So
right, but the other thing is that we hold the wealth. We hold the wealth through labor, and sometimes we physically hold the wealth.
Moving it from point A to point B.
Moving it, yeah, exactly.
It should disappear really easily.
No, you don't make it disappear because that's illegal. You withhold it. You say, you know what? You're not getting the money until this happened. And there's nothing really that they can do because you're not stealing it. You're just withholding it from the chain.
Organizing needs to have a really clear idea of like what the situation is.
Yeah, you have to analyze what your exactly. You have to analyze what your situation is to figure out what the best way to organize it. Sometimes it's withholding product. Sometimes it's withholding a service. Sometimes it's withholding direct labor. Sometimes it's withholding currency. But it's the act of withholding and stopping work.
The refusal to create the value.
Exactly. It's the refusal to create the value or to hold the value so that it becomes a problem for them. And that is what direct action really is about. And
that's what it's all about, Charlie Brown.
Exactly. So people need to know that as much as their employers may intimidate them, as much as they may want to try to go after them. The fact is,
if I do that, I'll lose my job.
The fact
if you do that, your employer loses everything.
Exactly. So you could go to the National Labor Board of Relations and file a complaint. And yeah, they work as slow as molasses. They have a lot to lose if they don't follow the rules. So we need to make sure that we are on our game. But the other thing is that if we are on our game, then suddenly it becomes costly for employers to engage in this kind of activity just because there's going to be a response to their action.
Which is why, we have a set of de facto laws that we can enforce too, because like you said, if they don't follow the rules, even if they have a fascist government, fascist police force to come down and union organizing is illegal and they can just obliterate the workers for doing it, well, still withholding everything. And you have the de facto law of, if you don't follow these rules that we set, you lose everything. Your factory goes up in smoke, you don't have any money, you'll have no cash registers.
And then on top of that, you have all the, the protest activity and all that stuff that really they don't like because that stuff ruins their business. Bad press ruins their business. There's so many things that we can do.
Well, I mean, they own the press, but it still ruins their business because people physically can't enter the store and buy stuff.
And so that's why it is very important and crucial for labor unions to have this kind of power, because back in the day, they were able to do great things with this power. They were able to house people, literally house people. And that's where we should be right now. We should have been further along than we are. And we lost 30, 40, 50 years of progress. We lost so much in the past, really since Reagan, that we have to build back. And this is getting there. One thing that you can do if you really did enjoy the show and help us out and to help the movement out, like, share, subscribe, comment, do all those great things. Hit us up on social media. The network is at Enceladus1 on Twitter. And I am... As
we shilled for Mastodon.
Right. Well, I have a personal Mastodon. It's Kitsune Flame at mastodon.social. And Hims Fox, yours?
Oh, God. I don't remember. I'm probably going to make a new one.
You made a new one. Oh God, you always forget.
I joined like a Woo space, and then I just sort of stopped using it. It's hard for me to wrap my head around the way Mastodon works.
You should
something
use
I'm gonna have to try multiple times.
You should use snouts.org. That way you can chill for barking
I'll
points.
do Snout.
Aramal, what's your stuff?
I don't really have anything. I just have like
See,
FA,
he's
I
the
may get
best.
posted on. I deleted my Twitter like ages ago.
He's the best
you've-
leftist among us.
Exactly.
He has no social media.
He is incognito with that shit. Look at that. But yeah, so if you did like us, hit us up on social
you have a
media,
person.
give us a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Smash that like button.
Smash, yeah, exactly. Give it all to us. Just like
Likes are not
we're
to be
on our
debated.
knees, and
Likes
we
are
just
to be
we just
smashed.
want a big, thick stream of likes. I mean,
Hey.
okay, so we're ending this like right now. Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.